Good afternoon and welcome to the Downers Grove School District Parent Guide to Assessments. My name is Matt Rich. I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum and Instruction. I'm going to be guiding you through our assessment orientation. There are four things we really want to look at when we're thinking about instruction for students. What is it that they need to know and be able to do? How do we know that they've learned it? What do they do when they get it? And what do we do when they don't? In order to identify what it is that we want kids to know and be able to do, we use a variety of ways to understand where our targets are. The first is we begin with the Common Core State Standards. These are the Illinois Learning Standards in this newest form. They are state mandated by the 2014 to be fully implemented. From there, we've taken those Common Core standards and we've broken them down into curriculum ladders. Both in math and language arts we're working, and these are the step-by-step guides that students need to do in order to progress to complete understanding of a content area. From the curriculum ladders, teachers identify what is the outcome that they need to accomplish. This might be, I can draw lines and angles. As kids progress, they might look at lines of symmetry and how those angles are found and what the measurements are. And then from those curriculum outcomes, we look at creating daily learning targets. What is it that we want that student to accomplish that day? We also use two types of assessment. The first is formative. Formative assessments are to guide instruction. They are things that we do like asking questions, taking an exit slip at the end of a day, or simply putting a little writing on a whiteboard and a child putting it up to show, hey, do I know where I'm at, so that we can figure out what question to ask next, what learning experience to move forward with, and what do we need to do in order to help you grow. Summative assessments are what we think in terms of traditional assessment. These rank children in understanding what they've accomplished. A great summative assessment might be the ISATs. We take that in March, and students can then see where they get in comparison to other students within Illinois. Summative assessments are not used to guide instruction. So in District 58, we use a variety of assessments to really guide instruction because that's our most important goal. What do we want our kids to be able to do next as we help them through their curriculum and learning experiences? We are introducing the NWEA MAP, and that's one of the big points of this presentation. The MAP looks at math, language arts, and reading, and looks at what kids know and what they need to go next. We also use a thing called curriculum-based measures. We have three versions that we use in the district. The company AIMSweb puts them together. One is the reading CBM, one is the math computation, which is used by some schools, and the third is the math concepts, applications, and problems, which is used also by some schools. Screeners are used periodically to identify what do we need to do for a longer period of time. Progress measures are used frequently for children that are at risk and identifying, are you growing at the rate that we want you to grow? These want to be quick and simple. Three assessments that we use for progress measures: reading CBM, the MComp, and the MCamp. I'll be going more into each of these assessments later. Also, we want to look at what are they doing in the classroom. It's great to take nationalized tests and see where you're at, but that's only one piece. What's going on in the classroom? How are you mastering that content? Are you understanding the concepts, and is that demonstrated in the assignments? We also have two summative assessments. We have the ISAT, which is administered by the state and gives our kids progress on a national ranking. We also have the Stanford, which we purchased from an outside organization, and also ranks our students in reading and mathematics on a national ranking. The MAP assessment will be replacing the Stanford assessment. The great thing about MAP, as you'll see later on, is it can be used to rank children and see where they're at compared to a national peer set, but also can be used to guide instruction. And finally, we have the OLSAT, which looks at children's aptitude in a group administered assessment and looks at verbal and nonverbal skill sets. Let's look deeper at the AIMSweb reading CBM. This is a task that a student does with a teacher, and they read a passage, and the sample is before you. They have 1 minute to read this passage, and we look for fluency. How well can you read it? How fast can you read it? How many errors do you have during a period of time? It's quick, it's easy. It gives us an idea of a child's general reading health, which correlates also to their reading comprehension. On the math side, we have what's called the AIMSweb Math Comp. And this is a computation assessment. Children have 8 minutes to do all of these calculations. It looks much like we did growing up, 1 through 31, the odds. When we look at what a child is computing, we can look at different questions and see which ones they get right and which wrong, and rank them nationally and see if they're getting more questions correct than they have in the past. The Math Concepts and Application Probe is also an 8-minute assessment. This is much more of the problem-solving, word-based problems, and you can see there's a very distinctive difference in the type of problems that are asked and the type of thinking children have to do when they're doing the Math Concepts and Applications Probe. When we look at the NWEA MAP, this is a computerized assessment. Unlike the AIMSweb Math Comp or Math Computation or the Reading CBM, it's untimed, and children have as long as they want to be able to answer the questions as they go through. It's a dynamic assessment, which means that it adjusts to the level of each child as they go through the assessment and really gives us some output data that allows us to target skill development. When we look at the map, we can see a child gets challenged appropriately because every time they get a question right, they get a harder question, and every time they get wrong, they get an easier question. And by that moving up and down in different goal areas that we assess, we can understand what a child's instructional level is. The results are immediate, and teachers and students are given ideas of where are their strengths, where are their growth areas, and what skills we can work on next. Here's an example math problem from the primary math map assessment. Children, kindergarten, first grade, have to go and look at, do they know parallel lines, and circle which ones have parallel lines. It's simple. They go through, they hit the little cursor, and they can find the 2 that have parallel lines along the way. They may not have. Another math assessment is a rule box. And children have to look and convert these 3 numbers to how many different meters there are. Now, for example, the first answer would be 1 meter, second answer would be 4, and the third answer, children would have to move both the 5 and the 0 up to get 50 meters as they go through. And this really allows us to see that children can demonstrate knowledge of how to apply the pattern of reasoning. As it gets harder, the MAP assessment includes a calculator when children need it. And you can see with this calculation, the calculator appears so that children can use the calculator to identify which equation they do, because we were looking at where do the lines intersect. It's a graphing challenge, and we want to know that they understand points of intersection. On the reading assessment, we can see that children must choose from a bank of words which ones seem to make sense within the story. This is language usage, and so would you use can, or would you use might, or you must? And the child has to put which word makes sense as they go through. Other reading passages where children have longer spans to look through, they are given questions, and they'll read this passage, and they'll be given a variety of questions to look for. This one looks for a reason that the sparrow stays. The next question looks at an opinion, has the children looking at which one is an opinion based on the passage that they read. The output is that we are given both for students and teachers is called a RIT score. A RIT is a constant curriculum measure in which we look at the curriculum that children need to know and split it up into equal subunits. From this, we can identify a child's instructional level. The NWEA is not a mastery test. We aren't going to give children hundreds of questions about what they need to do and what they're working on in their English visualization. What it does is see what skills that they have and what skills that they don't from a survey approach. It's a roadmap towards helping children achieve mastery. Classroom assessments really will identify whether a child has mastered that skill thoroughly. When we look at assessment, what we really want to do is get a full picture of a child, which means we can't rely on any one assessment. We want to have a balance. We want to look at the MAP data. We want to look at the teacher's class and the data from the classroom performance. And we want to use different nationalized things like those AIMSweb CBM'S or the ISAT. Because looking at all 3 points, we can have a true understanding of where the child's at and what they need to be successful as they move forward. When we look at the MAP reports, this is a sample report, and this is not where we'll start out with because we do not have this much data. We're really looking at a child's RIT score. If you look at column 10 in that middle column, this is where the child's at in terms of our curriculum understanding. This is the important number because this tells a teacher and a student what they need to work on next. Also, what's nice is what would be a child's growth. What is a typical child that started at a 214 grow or a 206 grow, and how much did this child go? As we said earlier, like the summative scores, we do get a percentile rank also. Our children's scores are going to look like this. Because this is their first time taking the assessment, we will get their RIT score because, as you can see, the RIT for this child in the mathematics was a 160. I believe this is a kindergartner. If we look at the grade, it's grade 0. They took the child in the winter of this year. This was my test child, and specifically my kindergarten child who got to take it this past week. And we can see what the error range is and what percentile they rank in. Unfortunately, we cannot look at growth yet, and we cannot look at patterns over time because it is a first assessment. This is what our children's first test reflection will look like. When we look at goal performance, these are our target areas. We're given in a percentile, and we're allowed to see where children are growing in comparison to their peers. For example, if we're looking at a child's number sense and their ability to calculate, we want to look at where are they at in comparison to norm groups. And in this particular situation, if we look at the number sense, this child scored at the high level, and therefore they were in the top 20% of their peers in the area of number sense. It's nice comparative data, but once again, we really want the RIT number underneath so we can look at what a child needs to grow when we look at the skills that we're connecting in the classroom. So what does this look like in the classroom? It's so important that we look at a child's scores because we identify where they're strong and where they need help and target that instruction to focus on those strengths and those growth areas. Here's an example. We have a class here that took it last year, and we can see that the children in this group, and it's sorted by their basic skills and vocabulary, that we have 4 or 5 different groups. But if you look a few lines down, we can see the child that starts at literature in 210 is in a different literature group than they would be if they're looking at informational text, and is in a different group than what they would be if they're working at basic skills and vocabulary. So what teachers running their reading groups, she's going to pull that child into 3 different groups depending on what her learning target is for the class. This is what flexible grouping means. That we look at what a child's skills that they need to develop and develop groups that will meet those skills. And we adjust those groups based on which topic and learning target we're trying to hit. How do we do this? I've talked a lot about needing to have skills that children are working on. Well, we use this thing called Descartes. Descartes is a list of continuum learning. What are the standards kids need to develop, and how do we move in that progressive piece? It's a formative assessment, as we mentioned earlier. We're going to be using this data to actually guide what's going on in the classroom to help your child grow. This is one look at the Descartes range. And as you can see, with a child who has a skill range, and we're looking at foundational skills and vocabulary, and we start in the 200 range, and we can see that this child's working on dividing words into consonant plus and the LE symbol. The next stage, if they're in the 210 range, they're adding the suffix able and able. And once they've gotten past the 220 range, they've actually mastered that particular realm. Or if you go down to context clues, we can see that children are starting out in the 200 range of determining the meaning of the verb. The next thing, they're going to look at a more complex passage, and they're going to add adjective forms, and they're going to increase the levels of their sentences. In the third stage of that 220, we'll see that we're trying to look for best meaning given the adjective, noun, and verb. So we're seeing a progression of skills, and what we may have is in a group, teachers using different questions based on a child's RIT score in that goal area to help that child be successful and grow next. The results of this is really great classroom differentiation. We may have flexible guided reading groups. We may have different questioning. We may actually have different activities and learning products that children make as a result of what their needs are and where do we need to grow next. The great part of this is it gives us individual data, but allows us the idea of how to group them in order to be successful. We also look at this in terms of our RTI program. With response to intervention, children that have not grown at the level that we want to, we provide tiered small group instructional support. Plus, we also want to look at our organizational and general functioning. Is the child getting the assignments down? Are they keeping their track of their materials? And are they prepared for what they need to do next? If we look at some of our intervention pieces, this is children in red are in our bottom 10% of students. Children in yellow are the next 15% of students, and we can see some really interesting factors. For example, this child, if we go down the NWEA reading RIT, the child at 211 is not in our bottom 25% of kids. She's at the 61st percentile. But when you look at her word analysis and vocabulary, she is in our bottom quarter. As a result, if we give this child some specified support in word analysis and vocabulary, we're going to help that child grow and progress in their need area and can be commensurate of other skills that they have. When we look at what a kid does when they have learned, we also need classroom differentiation. We don't want children just stabling within the classroom. We really want to push them and get them to grow and move forward. This includes classroom differentiation. Once again, some flexible grouping. What are we doing when we have IXL in place, and how do we give them different problems? We also look at accelerated math. We have children at the 7th and 8th grade that are working a year to two ahead in their mathematics program. And finally, our gifted and enrichment program. Once again, if you look at our top quarter of kids, the blue is our top 10%, and our green is our next 20%. We also have another kid who scored a 211. But if we look at this piece, in her word analysis and vocabulary, she scored very high in word analysis compared to the rest of her strengths. We have to work to see how we can capitalize on that and continue to enrich that word analysis skills while providing supports to their reading comprehension and reading strategies set. Once again, we may have differentiated groups based on what that child needs. So, what kind of growth can we expect? What are we looking for? When we look at children, we can target where they've started and where they go next. We will be administering this 3 times a year, September, January, and May. And what we can do is track based on children's scores. Because the sample pool is so big, we can children's scores in the fall and what would be a typical output for that child in the spring. For example, if we look at the median at kindergarten, the mean kindergarten student starts at 143. That mean child throughout the year will score 13 RIT points and end up at a 156. As a result of this, we can see whether kids grow at a faster rate or a slower rate than typical peers. What's awesome about this is that the NWEA sample pool is so large, we can take a 5th grader that also started at a 143, compare that child to other 5th graders that start at 143, and get a typical growth score for children that are at that point, which means if you have children that are high intervention, what would that growth be compared to other children with high intervention? And children that are high enrichment, what would be those growth norms compared to other children with that are high enrichment level? When we see negative growth, I think we have to ask ourselves a few questions. 1, is it a spring to fall issue? Do we have some summer regression? 2, do we actually have enough data? One of the ground rules I use is that we need 3 points of data in order to understand where a child's truly at. Now, that some of that could be classroom data, AIMSweb data, and map data. But we're looking specifically at the map. We really want 3 points of map data to compare if we're looking at a map analysis by itself. Are there issues with emotional pieces? Is there text anxiety? One of the great things about MAP, because it's our test and because it is untimed, we can have children pause, take breaks, and come back to it without ruining the test integrity. As a result, we can work to reduce their anxiety and increase their level of success. Finally, as a district, we want to look at, is this a subject area issue? Is it a curriculum issue? Are we seeing patterns with this child and other children? And how do we change our instructional program to meet these challenges of growth? One of the neat things that you'll get is this information called LEXILE. LEXILE is based on the RIT score, and it really is a computation to figure out what's the level of difficulty a child can handle in terms of text. It is taking frequently said words and the measure of the length of a sentence, and they calculate what's a relative capacity for a child to handle. While LEXILE is great to identify groups of books students can use in order to grow and might be at their reading level, it doesn't say everything. There's a lot more to it. There's genre, theme, content, and interest. Frequently, we can get a child who's willing to read much more difficult text because it's in their area of interest. Often, also, themes may not be appropriate. The classic example of this is we would not hand a second grade boy the book Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. While they may be absolutely capable of reading the material, he's not capable of understanding the themes. So when we look at LEXILE score, we can compare that to the RIP, and we have a 75% chance of understanding what's an appropriate text for that child. It gives us a range. And why this may be important? Well, if we're studying Huckleberry Finn and we have a child that can read at 390 LEXILE, we're going to choose a simpler version of the book by Mattern. As we increase the complexity, we might choose Sutter's version. And finally, the Twain version is significantly more difficult and may not be accessible to all, so we will choose the right text in order to meet children's needs. MAP provides us a great many tools for supporting students in learning. If you have any more further questions, feel free to check out the MAP website at nwea.org or to email me at mrich@dg58.org. Thank you very much.